Well, good afternoon, everybody. It is a Sunday before we come back to school on the 25th, and I'm wearing my Thanksgiving leaves in honor of fall kind of being over now, and we're getting ready for Christmas soon. And then I put a little American flag on so you can once again see my patriotism, since this is an American holiday. And I was very thrilled over the break to go to see Lincoln, the movie, and maybe you read this in the paper or saw it on TV or just knew it, that actually Abraham Lincoln was the person responsible for creating Thanksgiving as a national holiday back in 1863. He designated that Thursday, that fourth Thursday, as or third Thursday in November, as a day of gratitude. So that's why we do it. And even though we remember the stories of the Pilgrims celebrating with the Native Americans, thankful for their help in getting through that first tough year, they continued that idea of gratitude and Thanksgiving well into the 1800s and even today. So thanks to the Pilgrims and Puritans and Abraham Lincoln. So today what I wanted to do was take a little time to look at a couple more of the questions off of your worksheet, specifically questions number 12, 13, 14, 15, and talk a little bit more about the battles, because that's not really something that's considered super important when it's concerning the Revolutionary War. However, it would be good to understand sort of the timeline of some of these important battles and why the revolutionaries, the colonists, these patriots, these radicals, I keep using those words interchangeably, were able to kind of turn the tide of war, and when that occurred. So if you have your worksheet with you, you want to go to the third page, and we're going to look at a little bit question number 12, how and why did the Battle of Oriskany, which is actually in New York State, affect the outcome of the Battle of Saratoga, which is also in New York State. Maybe some of you have traveled into the Mohawk Valley and been to Saratoga before. And certainly the role of the American Indians during this time is very important, because they had a lot to do with the British not being as successful when it came to that particular battle. And we know Saratoga is known as the turning point of the war. So if you remember, the last time we talked about battles, it was back on questions 6 and 7, and we talked about how the Continental armies at the battles of Long Island, Manhattan, White Plains were routed, if you will, and George Washington actually turned the tide of war when he got to New Jersey. He, in 1776, December as a matter of fact, remember, he took his little ship, I think they were called Dardan boats, and surprised the main body of British troops at Princeton, New Jersey. He had previously surprised the Hessians, and then forced the British to kind of leave New Jersey altogether. They had to abandon New Jersey. And so the Patriots were pretty excited that, Washington's army, got rid of the Hessians. They moved the British away from New Jersey, and some Patriots actually began to enlist, and Washington had about 6,000 volunteers. But on September 11th, 1777, Washington met the British in a more formal battle near Brandywine, Pennsylvania, and the Britons really whipped the colonial troops and captured the main prize, which was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So because Boston was in such difficulty at this time, the Continental Congress had a hard time meeting there. They had been meeting in Philadelphia, but of course you would imagine the British were excited to think that they had gained Philadelphia as well, because now they have another area that these radicals were meeting. They had already captured New York, so three major cities, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, were kind of in the hands of the British. So Washington, as I said, met the British in Brandywine, was defeated there, and but the Patriots are going to meet up with some very good news in the next 6 weeks when the colonial soldiers defeat a British army that was invading from Canada at a place called Saratoga in upstate New York, which is just up the Hudson River. If you go to Albany and a little bit further north, you're going to find Saratoga. And in that particular battle, 6,000 redcoats surrendered. But the bigger question is, if you look at your worksheet, the question was, how did the Battle of Oriskany, which was actually before that point in Saratoga, why was that so crucial? And so remember that the British strategy, we talked about this too, was to try to isolate New England, try to get control of the Hudson River, and then divide and conquer. To that end, Burgoyne, the British commander, begins to march his soldiers down the Hudson River Valley from Canada, and he actually captures a Fort Ticonderoga. Maybe some of you have been there. I know I have. However, he was forced to retreat from Fort Stanwix, which is near Oriskany, after some very deadly warfare involving some complex groups of Indians. So that's the Indian part of this particular battle. There were some Germans there, some English who were not necessarily loyal to the king, and some colonists. The Americans were waiting there at Saratoga and were successful at forcing Burgoyne to surrender, as his troops began to face a lot of dwindling food supplies and literally no reinforcements. And if you remember, we had said that the British, especially Commander Howe and Burgoyne, liked to travel with an entourage. They had a groupie of sorts, people to come and cook for them, people who came and brought clean, military clothes, people that were bringing fresh horses. They really liked to travel like they were rock stars. And so that limited how quickly they could go, where they were going to go, and how they would recover from particular battles over a certain period of time. So Saratoga was important because this victory at Saratoga gave the French the reason that they needed to enter the war. And by creating a formal alliance after this important battle, once they realized that at Saratoga they were able to defeat the British in this really big battle, they decided in 1778 that it was important to the Patriots that the French come in and help them out. The French felt regardless, no matter how this war turned out, they would benefit, because if the British were their enemies, to help the enemy of your enemies would make, the Americans your friends. And so the British were not counting on the French coming to the colonists' aid with their very able-bodied French Navy, and that was very important. That was a crucial help in the war. And the French had already been supplying the colonists with muskets and gunpowder, cannons, military advisors. If you remember in the Patriot, a young French leader by the name of Lafayette came to the aid of many of the colonial generals and gave his military advice as well. So that is crucial to your understanding that this the lack of reinforcements for the British certainly led to Burgoyne losing at Saratoga. The role of the Indians helping where they didn't really want them to help led to this Battle of Oriskany, and then on to Saratoga being a very risky move. But my next question says, but why do we remember Valley Forge, which is nowhere near Saratoga? Valley Forge is actually in near Philadelphia, and that's sort of the southern front. If you remember, just a couple of minutes ago I mentioned that the British had captured Philadelphia, and the British were actually wintering in Philadelphia after they had taken control of it, but poor Washington's troops were camped about 20 miles to the west, or I'm sorry, to the north of them, in a place called Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And two important men came to their aid. As I said earlier, France's Marquis de Lafayette, n'est-ce pas, and Prussia's Frederick von Steuben came and used the time wintering in Valley Forge to help to train the Continental Army even better. They actually took these very, poor and inexperienced recruits and turned them into professional soldiers. So we think of Valley Forge as being that terrible winter where these young men are in these little, they look almost like dog houses. And when we get to class, I'll try to pull up a picture for you. These Continental Army men are stuck really in what are known as kind of like little dog houses. They have very little food. Some of them have smallpox. They don't have shoes, some of them, and it's winter. But throughout all of this, they get the help of the Marquis de Lafayette and Baron von Steuben, and they learn to be even better soldiers, which will help them in the long run. And they hope to create a stronger fighting force with Washington as their commander. So we remember Valley Forge because of that, and as a kind of a sorrowful place, but on the other hand, a place where they kind of started to feel a little bit more vigorous, and they started to get a little better morale because they were becoming better soldiers. So that's a good point too. And then the last thing that I want to talk about, because this is kind of important, when we get to class I want to show you a little clip of the Patriot, because there is a turning point too in the South. And if you remember, the Patriot is really about a Southern patriot. His name escapes me for the moment, but you all know who Mel Gibson is, and that's who the main character is. He is from South Carolina, and one of the things that occurs is that the British, remember, once they felt that they had gotten the North kind of divided and conquered, where they had separated the Middle Atlantic states from the New England states, they were then going to concentrate on Virginia, because Virginia was also a very important spot, but full of patriots that they wanted to try to corral a little bit. So the tide of war was running against the British here in the North. We just saw that with Oriskany and with Saratoga. So now they begin to shift their strategic focus onto the South. And the Brits initially met success capturing two important places. One was Savannah, Georgia, which is right on the ocean, so there's an important harbor town, in December 1778. And then Charleston, South Carolina, another important port and harbor town, the following May. But at a place called Cowpens, South Carolina, there was a decisive colonial victory in 1781, and this particular defeat pushes Britain's General Cornwallis, to retreat toward Virginia. And as he's moving toward Virginia, the Continental Army is moving in to kind of surround him this way. And when he tries to move his troops to the water, the French Royal Navy is there. And so they couldn't get onto their ships to evacuate. The French Royal Navy is there waiting to kind of do a little squeeze play. So the Battle of Cowpens, and then eventually, as I said, at Yorktown in 1781, which is in Virginia, proved to be two very decisive reasons why General Cornwallis had to surrender. He had nowhere else to go. He had his back to the sea at Yorktown, and the exit was blocked by this, again, surprise visit of the French fleet, and the French supports the colonial cause. The colonists, the the Patriots, the Continental Army, are pushing in from the land so that it creates kind of a squeeze play, and General Cornwallis has to concede not just the city of Yorktown, but the war itself. So he surrenders his British troops to George Washington in 1781. So that was in the autumn of 1781, and it takes nearly 2 years for them to create a treaty which is going to end the war officially, which is known as the Treaty of Paris, which is the same name of a treaty which ended the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War. So this particular time period between 1781 and 1783 is the time when the official conclusion of the war takes place, and the treaty making takes some time. American diplomats like John Adams, John Jay, Ben Franklin, they all go, and they want to use the French as kind of their mediator, so they use Paris, France as their place, a neutral place, if you will, that will help the British and now the new American nation to come together and create a peace that they can all live with and that they would all abide by. So the hardest work is going to come now, because they've created a new nation, now they have to really govern it. So Britain's surrender and the Treaty of Paris end the war. But without that French involvement, this would have been a very difficult last 2 years. So the turning point at Cowpens, the final battle at Yorktown, and that'll end the battles themselves. So I hope that helps you a little bit. 12, 13, 14, we'll talk a little bit more about the successes and failures in the North and the West when we get into class. But I think some of that will help you when you're looking at your reading and doing those questions, okay? So I hope you have a good Sunday. I was very happy because our favorite college team, Penn State, won their last game yesterday, so that makes me happy. But today, we have another big game. Got to watch the Giants. So I'm about ready to get my Giants jersey on and be ready for another great game, Giants versus the Packers. So stay warm. It's starting to get a little cold and chilly. Remember that I hope that these are helping you, and I hope you find them important to your understanding, to deepen your understanding. And as always, I am glad to be doing these for you and hope they work. So you're the cheese to my macaroni today, and have a great day, and I'll see you in class.